Thank you all. My name is Steve Sparber. I'm of counsel here at Nelson Mullins and going to kick off the technical solutions panel. My background and really my interest in resilience came from the fact prior to being Nelson Mullins, actually, I was in-house counsel at PJM Interconnection, which is the nation's largest RTO, actually I believe the largest in the world still. And so there I worked a lot on I was mostly a markets attorney, but resilience and the role that played in the electric grid was always paramount in what we were thinking. Quick story, I started late 2013, so within my first few weeks on the job was actually the polar vortex of 2014, so that was a real trial by, kind of baptism by fire experience for me and I think for the whole organization. And it's interesting because as we're talking about a lot about price signals and incentives and everything, that's something I worked on a lot at PJM and something that is really paramount in everyone's discussions now and everyone's thinking now. So it was interesting for me because as we went from in 2014 where there really were some grave danger of some blackouts during some sub-zero weather. And, to echo what many of the panelists and what David Quam said earlier, I mean, this is real life. If you have large-scale blackouts or rolling blackouts in sub-zero temperatures, that's not just money and infrastructure, it's people's lives that we're talking about. And so as sort of my role there evolved and as what PJM and the entire electric industry is what we're talking about, that's really what we're focused on also when we're talking about resilience. So I think it's important that people understand that. And so what we have now, after the first panel, we had a robust policy discussion, which was great. We want to also turn to some of the solutions providers that are really implementing this on different levels, and we have a really great panel. So what I'm going to do is be quiet in a moment, let you hear from the experts, but I'll give a quick intro to all of our panelists. And as you'll see very soon, it's a diverse group of folks that are doing this. So the first panelist is Eric DuPont. At the end, Eric DuPont is Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer of PowerSecure, which is really the nation's largest microgrid provider at this point. I think about 40% of the microgrids in the country are built by PowerSecure.
That's right.
They're acquired about 2 years ago by Southern Company, so we're very glad to have them up here. And Eric was great, flew up from Atlanta. Will Gathright is the founder and CEO of Tumalo. He is not, despite what his name tag says, with the U.S. Army, but he is CEO and founder of Tumalo. And they are a software provider, also one of the featured companies over here, providing software solutions for behind-the-meter storage at a lot of buildings. Third panelist is Michael McGee, who is with the U.S. Army, is actually their Executive Director of Energy Initiatives. Michael is responsible, amongst other things, for ensuring that our military is prepared and ready. I had the pleasure of hearing him speak at an event last week on grid resilience, and as you'll see, when the Army looks at the issue of resilience, it is paramount and really important and front and center of what they are looking to do, and making sure that they're always mission ready. And the last panelist is Michelle Patron, who's Director of Sustainability Policy at Microsoft. And as Michelle's going to get into the way Microsoft looks at resiliency and sustainability in general, they look at a wide range of factors. So with that, I'm going to let Eric kick it off. Each of our panelists will have a few minutes to talk about what they're doing, and then we'll come back for a moderated Q&A and then question and answer session with the entire audience. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Eric.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone, for joining. As Stephen said, PowerSecure, we were a publicly traded company for the past about 18 years. We were sold or acquired by Southern Company about 2 years ago now. So you can see Southern Company, when I came into them, we felt was a Southeast utility. Predominantly that's what they have been. But you can see with the acquisition of Southern Gas or Atlantic Gas and Light 2016, and now the acquisition of PowerSecure, as well as the investments made in a company called Southern Power, which owns a lot of wind, combined cycle, and solar facilities across the U.S. Southern's breadth is pretty large, 9 million utility customers now, 46,000 megawatt hours of generating capacity. So it is on a nationwide scale, providing services to commercial, industrial clients, residential, et cetera. PowerSecure, we are very diverse in what we do. So this hopefully provides some perspective. We're providing distributed generation at the substation level for utilities to provide capacity resources for them, particularly cooperative utilities that need that capacity resource because they don't have their own generating facilities. We provide utility infrastructure support for utilities across the U.S. in substation design, implementation, as well as transmission and distribution line implementation. Just as a side note, right now, we've got about 850 resources in Puerto Rico doing storm restoration, and we've been there since October. So that is a real challenge. When you talk about having an unreliable system, absolutely probably the most difficult system to work on is what we've seen even before the storm occurred. But the resiliency of the people is truly amazing. It is amazing to watch those people, and they've suffered for so long without power, but they have just continued to kind of push through. It's been an amazing time down there, amazing effort, but that's something we're really proud of right now that we have going on. And then really the focus of the company, the founding of the company, was behind the meter solutions for commercial and industrial clients, working closely though with utilities. We always want to work in concert with utilities to provide support to those utilities to make sure that what we're doing for our customers, their customers, behind the meter is not going to cause a disruption to their grid or to what their objectives are. So we're always working in concert with the utilities. So the company is really founded on behind the meter solutions, distributed generations predominantly. We've added in now storage, microgrid applications, solar, and energy efficiency over the course of the years. But it's really around how do we drive cost-effective solutions that drive value for those customers. An example is what we believe, at least what we've been told, and by companies like Green Tech Media, who is a large research firm, that we've actually are developing late stages of implementing the largest microgrid in the United States, maybe even in the world. We're not quite sure. We say the world there. Let's just say the United States. We know it's definitely across the United States. 16 megawatts of solar, 4 megawatts of fuel cells, 6 megawatts of backup generation recips, 4 megawatt hours of battery storage. So this was at a large headquarter campus where we got 2 utility feeds coming in, and we've built the entire microgrid to create the resiliency at this site. The site cannot have a disruption in power. So we have the ability to provide redundant systems to ensure that if the grid power goes down, that the site continues to operate. So this is a perspective of what we do. We do this all around how do we optimize the economics related to those assets. Again, that's kind of what PowerSecure was founded on. Not only creating resiliency, but creating the economic values associated with those assets. A little bit more about PowerSecure. We entered into an alliance last year with Bloom Energy, fuel cell provider. We own about 100 megawatts of fuel cells today across the country under long-term power purchase agreements. Again, it's another idea of prime power applications behind the meter, creating another resilient solution. The thing that really attracted us with Bloom was the ability to couple our storage system with their fuel cells to optimize the utilization of that power being created by the fuel cells at the sites.
You go. Go on. Sorry. Okay.
All right. One other alliance partner that we've recently brought into the mix with us is a company called Advanced Microgrid Solutions. Advanced Microgrid Solutions is basically taking these distributed energy resources, assets that we own or assets that our customer owns, and optimizes the utilization of those assets to create value for those customers. Again, it's on the same kind of methodology and approach that we've had to how do you maximize the value from these distributed resources. Of course, they create resiliency, redundancy systems available at the site, but also can create additional economic value. So we've partnered with Advanced Microgrid Solutions to integrate our control platform with their optimization platform in order to enhance the asset value and utilization. All right, that's all.
Okay. Thank you, Eric, and definitely great insights. And the work that you're doing with PowerSecure really is truly groundbreaking, especially what you're doing in Puerto Rico. And I think, as we get into the policy, you're going to have some really great insights into, the policy discussion that we're going to respond to the policy panel. And thank you. So with that, let me hand it off to Will next. And Will is going to talk about his company, Tumalo, and some of the work that he's doing.
All right, so good morning, guys. My name is Will. I'm the founder of Tumalo. So we're a software company. We do control systems for behind-the-meter energy storage systems. So here again, the big idea is you come to a building like this one. You can put a battery in the basement of it. You can use it to, help reduce the power bills for the building. You can use it to help keep the lights on when the grid goes out. And with our system, you can also use it to sort of help the grid and get paid for, not only helping the building but helping the grid as well. This is sort of an up-and-coming technology. It's a technology that a lot of other energy like developers out there, folks that do, let's say, solar projects or energy efficiency projects, are looking at for like the commercial industrial space. So our model has been to become like a technology provider for them. So if you're a solar provider, and you're looking at adding storage to your practice, we can sort of give you everything it takes to do that. Starting from how do you prospect for sites and tell if a customer is going to be good for storage, what kind of value can it drive to that site. We can actually run sort of a live storage test drive for the customer to really get them kind of comfortable with this idea, because this is something that folks in the buildings may not have heard of when you first walk in, right? It's a little counterintuitive to stick a battery into a building. So it gives them time to get sort of comfortable with this idea, and then on into the controls and the actual operation of it. I think that for what I wanted to do here is talk a little bit about what this notion of resiliency means, sort of really to the folks in the building. So we're going to get kind of in the weeds here a little bit, because I think that can often get lost in kind of high-level discussions like this, and it's really important to keep this stuff in mind. So let's say that we are out, we're going to help a particular customer. So we walk into their building, and we advance a slide so that we can see what comes next. No, maybe we don't. Aha, here we go. So we canvass their building, we crawl through their electrical rooms, we get our hands good and dirty, and we come up with a panel schedule that I've obscured, so we can't tell what this person has in their buildings. But you can just sort of look at this; it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of circuits in the building. There's a lot of stuff there, right? And if there's an outage, maybe not all of this stuff is critical to keep on, right? It might be cost prohibitive to build a battery large enough to power a whole building like this one. So you sit down with the customer, you detail their loads, and they say, okay, well, if it's out, we really want these things to stay on. These might be things like lights or elevators or sump pumps or fire alarms, things like that. All right. So you say, that's great. Okay. Now we know what resilience actually means to this one particular customer. We talked about what it means for FERC, but this is what it means to these folks. These things have to stay energized. That's not necessarily as easy as it sounds, though, because then you start to take a look at physically, where is this stuff in the building? So maybe you get a look at a floor plan. These plans don't always exist, so you have to go and find them. And then you say, okay, well, of those circuits that we've identified, 2 of them are here in this one building, and then another one is here in this other, completely other building, right? So how do you actually, from a technical standpoint, how do you actually do this? It's not like you can beam power places through the wires in the same way that you can beam data places like over the internet, right? As soon as copper touches, that's one of the wonderful things about copper. As soon as copper touches copper, that electricity is going, right? So this is the sort of on-the-ground challenges that we face when it comes time to actually implement some of these resiliency things. So, part of our technology, when we say we provide this sort of technology package, a big part of that is orchestrating the various, thinking through issues like this, one, and then orchestrating the various switches and all the equipment that needs to go into place and to actually operate when the grid goes out. And by the way, it all has to work automatically, and it all has to work immediately. So that's just a little bit of my perspective. I think I'll close just with a little plug here. So in addition to my role with Tumalo, I also am a member of the Virginia Solar and Energy Storage Development Authority. So this was a position I was appointed to by former Governor McAuliffe, who's started to make a little bit of noise. So, I'm not going to speak as a member of the body for the rest of this talk, but if you have issues our job is to really sort of advance solar and storage, specifically at the state level for state of Virginia. So if you have, issues or grassroots lobbying efforts or whatnot that you'd like to see sort of brought in front of the board, just come and talk to me. We don't do a good enough job just sort of telling people that we exist. So, we're here and we're here to serve the folks of the Commonwealth. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. That was great. With that, we'll turn next to Michael McGee, and we'll get his presentation going. And Michael, take it away.
Great, thanks. So I think these come on by themselves now. That's great.
Yeah.
And where are we pointing to? I only have two slides, I think.
that thing. I had
Yeah.
That thing up there? Okay, great. Yeah, I just have a couple of slides here. This looks kind of busy, but don't study it. Don't get distracted by it, and don't try to read it, okay? So because the point of it is to show you actually that my organization is facilitating an abundance of projects, and these are real projects that are coming to fruition. That's the main point of this slide here, okay? So I'm going to describe something that I want you to understand is not just an idea and not just a concept that could occur. It's something that's actually occurring, and it takes a lot of work to make it successful, but it shows something that I think is valuable to this discussion that we've had today. First, I want to say the first panelists, I really appreciated their comments and their experiences and their perspectives. I thought it was really great. And the people here on the panel with me as well, I'm happy to be part of this, and thank you for letting the United States Army be a part of this. So some of you are familiar faces to me. You've heard what we're about, but some of you may not, and it would probably may not have heard what we're about, and it may surprise you to learn that the Army, as well as the Air Force and the Navy, are in a similar interest area where they're trying to facilitate the ability for utility companies, power providers, writ large, the bulk power system, to facilitate that whole community, that whole industrial base to do what it wants to do, which is primarily to make money. We're trying to help facilitate your ability to prosper and to serve your customers and their interests, to include the interests centered around the topic of resiliency. What we find is it's often not a technology issue that is a constraining factor. Technology is an enabler, that is true, but it is not something that there's an insurmountable physics problem that we've not been able to overcome to get someone to Mars. The issue is economically constrained by some set of circumstances that cannot be uncorked to allow the economics to support the idea of moving forward on a project. So our office was set up initially by the Army to react to a requirement that the federal agencies, in particular Department of Defense, increase the amount of renewable energy that they consume and increase the amount of new renewable energy generation that exists out there on the bulk power system. We were asked to facilitate that and increase that penetration of renewables into the market. We have since evolved to make our prime focus about resilience, because renewables is actually it's unleashed, I believe. It's become the most attractive investment opportunity in power generation that I think is there, other than perhaps natural gas fired generation. And I think that you're aware, and I don't believe it was emphasized too strongly by the first panel, but I think you're aware that there really isn't that much need for additional generation right now, and there hasn't been for quite some time. The issue is replacing the existing generation with something that's more efficient or something that is more desirable to customers. And so what's winning the day in that context is renewable power, especially wind and solar, but also natural gas. So we are trying to help facilitate entities that want to invest in those new generating assets by presenting an opportunity. And the opportunity is maybe you could build those assets on an Army base near you, or maybe an Air Force base near you, or maybe a Navy base near you. And there may be good reasons to do that. I'm going to talk about one project as a prime example, and then turn it back over to the flow here for questions. But if you studied this long enough, you'd see that everything in dark green up here has already been built and is operational. There's a couple in light green that are under construction. There's some that's sort of a pumpkin color that are in negotiation stage, and there's some that are in blue color that are in early assessment stage. And what these are deals typically with utilities, but also with private developers to establish and build new generation that's paid for, owned, operated, and maintained by the other party. The Army doesn't own it. The Army doesn't have to maintain it. The Army doesn't have to figure out how to get that done. We've facilitated by providing providing land that's at an interesting intersection. So I think I have the next slide. Talk about one project as an example. And this, I do have to say, like Puerto Rico, when you go to an island environment, the economics are very different. And many other circumstances as a result of that also are very different. However, if you've been to Oahu, where Honolulu is, and Waikiki and Diamond Head and so on, there's also a substantial Army presence on Oahu. And one of those installations, as we call it, or an Army base, is Schofield Barracks. There's also a second one called Wheeler Army Airfield, and there's a third one called Field Station Kania that are all on Oahu. In Hawaii, the utility, Hawaiian Electric, desired to build a new generation to, I believe, replace existing generation, but also maybe to add to some growth that was expected and help firm up their grid. One of the circumstances they realized was building power plants along the coast where the fuel oil comes in that typically powers those plants was a good idea for the convenience of logistics, but wasn't a great idea when the tsunami hits. So they wanted to build another plant higher up in elevation, up in the mountains, above the tsunami strike zone. That's where Schofield Barracks happens to be. They came to the Army and said, would you be willing to make some of your land available for a power plant to be constructed? And here's the deal. The deal is that power plant then could be islanded, so to speak, could be sectionalized away from the Oahu grid and turned inward to provide power to Schofield Barracks and Wheeler Army Airfield and Kania Field Station, which are adjacent to Schofield Barracks. That is, if the grid drops down, this plant can power those Army bases. Now, we already had backup generation in the form of diesel gensets for most of our, well, for all of our critical power needs, but a lot of our important power needs in the event of a grid disruption. But like probably most of you, those backup power solutions are designed for something like a 3-day weather outage. That's what's expected. And being an engineer, I will tell you that almost all design is based on some sort of historic record. It's not based on a future forecast of what the future looks like. So your heating and cooling in this building were designed based upon decades worth of degree heating and cooling days for this environment, and then maybe any energy efficiency desires the building owner had. They were not based upon what does the future look like for the Earth's climate, for example. So we have to anticipate what the future looks like and prepare for a more taxing, if you will, set of circumstances, and we have to plan for that. So Hawaiian Electric's doing the right thing. They're anticipating a future that has increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events and an increased demand for electric power for all of our needs all the time. We've become utterly dependent upon it. So we've facilitated this by providing an outgrant of land, and in return for that outgrant that is a lease of land, they give us back this backup power capability that we hope we never use, but now we've got it. And the thing with backup power is it doesn't make you any money typically. It sits there unused as an insurance policy until you need it. So the cool thing here is they're going to be using this backup power capability to do its what I call day job. It's going to provide power to the people of Oahu. Its night job is us. If we need this and the grid goes down, that plant can't provide power to customers anyway. The grid's down. But we can sectionalize that plant off and provide it to our on-base distribution system. And if you haven't imagined the idea, I submit to Eric, that's a microgrid. That's not what you would have thought of if someone said, build me a microgrid for Schofield Barracks. Well, we got a microgrid. It's a big one. It's a really good one. And it was effectively free from my perspective. So what we really see here is the opportunity for capitalizing upon each other's needs and extracting a higher value proposition than otherwise would have been delivered. That is, through planning, we can see those other values that are present and extract those hidden values. That piece of land, which is necessary for Army operations but was underutilized, can be made available for this purpose. Its additional value is extracted. This peaker plant that Hawaiian Electric was building is now also a backup power plant. That extra value was extracted, which I think is a key point in what we're discussing here. Is it's not just about the economics, and it's just not just about the immediate needs of that utility or that customer. It's about planning when you want to talk about resilience for the community, because we're all in this together. It can't be about a utility-customer relationship. It has to be about a utility and community relationship if we're going to talk about true resilience. I think maybe Governor Christie, who I don't know, and I don't know that circumstance, probably wasn't saying, well, whatever each customer wants, I'm sure they're going to figure something out with the local utility and they'll get over this Superstorm Sandy thing someday. No, I think it was viewed as more of a community issue. We have people that are relying upon one another. So the good thing also is that if the grid does go down on Oahu, once this plant is fully operational. It's under construction. There's going to be a ribbon cutting in May of this year. Once it is fully operationalized, it now gives us an option. So I think optionality is another feature here that we need to introduce into the conversation. So I'll close by saying I knew that someone was going to say safe, reliable, and affordable. And my stump speech says it's got to be, yes, safe, reliable, and affordable, but it's also got to be secure and it's got to be resilient. And that's not something that we should be asking each customer to price in as an additional option. It should be built in to our requirements. Increased concerns about cybersecurity and actual known intrusions into systems that are out there on the grid, and the prospect of even deeper penetrations that could have negative consequences in the extreme. Those are a real issue that we're concerned about. That's in the lane of secure. Resilient, I think of as it's not just another extension of the word reliability. It's not just a harder, stronger reliability. It's a plan B. What if your plan A fails? What if your reliable component or your reliable construct or your reliable operating procedures don't work? What is your plan B? Right now, the plan B is mostly bring in all the people to fix the broken plan A. And I don't think that's a great solution. I think, yes, improving the reliability of our systems is a part of improving the resilience of our systems, but we need plan Bs. We now have a plan B. This is a pretty awesome plan B here. So with that, I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. And with that, we'll go to the last panelist before we go to for moderated Q&A and then open up to the audience. But let me hand it off to Michelle Patron.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm Michelle Patron with Microsoft, and it really is a pleasure to be on this panel with both conventional and unconventional innovators. Microsoft really lives at the intersection of resilience, of innovation, of secure, and of clean energy. And some of you might be scratching your head saying, why is Microsoft here talking about energy? Well, we are using growing amounts of energy to power the cloud that makes modern computing work. So what's that cloud? That cloud is really a transcontinental machine that's made up of 2 million kilometers of fiber, over 1 gigawatt of installed IT compute power, 42 regions of cloud, 100 plus data centers around the world, and over 1 million servers all spinning at the same time 24/7 to help governments, to help enterprises, and to help individuals do their computing. And why does this run? It runs because of power. We use about as much energy as a small state, and it is possible that in the near future, if we continue to grow at the rates that we've been growing, we will consume more energy than the largest utility in the United States. And we need that energy 24/7, that energy because we are building that machine, and that machine will be around for 20, 30, 40 years. We want that energy to be as clean as it can be. We want it to have as low impact on the climate as it can be, and it needs to be resilient in the face of all threats that it could face in the future, both from all the different sources, including extreme weather and climate. And so we've made ambitious targets to get more and more of our energy from clean energy sources, from renewable energy sources, but we're also very focused on making sure this runs 24/7 as we bring that renewable energy online. So every time that we build a data center, for every megawatt that we pull from the grid, we build a megawatt of battery and a megawatt of backup generation that usually sits idle, just in case anything happens, just like the Army. So we are increasingly thinking about how do we use those assets, those data centers, that technology to be able to enhance reliability and have the optionality that was discussed by my colleagues here on the panel. So I want to talk about 4 different ways in which we are doing that. The first is there's a lot of talk about the eastern part of the United States as well as Hawaii. I thought many of you probably didn't think you'd be talking about Wyoming today, but we're doing some really fascinating things in Wyoming. We are expanding our data center. We're looking to build 250 megawatts of wind to power that new data center. The utility, there's a close partner of ours, Black Hills Utility, wanted to build a peaker plant for us in order to manage the system. We didn't think that we needed it. We didn't want that to be also rate-based to the local customers. And we have this backup generation behind our meter and thought, well, can't we think a little bit outside the box here? And what if we took that backup gen, instead of it being diesel, we made it into a very quick start, high efficiency natural gas plant that could provide backup power, not just to us, but to the local grid of Cheyenne whenever they needed it, can't we figure this out? And lo and behold, we figured out this new design. And as you see, we have the wind coming online to the local service areas, and now that back and forth between our data centers in order to help support the local grid. So thinking outside the box, both with the existing technology and in new innovative contracts. We're also looking and investing in new technologies. So as I mentioned, we're looking at a lot of behind-the-meter assets. One that was talked about is fuel cells. We're also looking at how you can have fuel cells right at the data center, mixed in with the rack and servers, so that you are injecting directly into the data center right now natural gas, and hopefully down the road hydrogen as well. And we just brought online our first fully integrated fuel cell data center in downtown Seattle, and looking to do more of these in the future. Another way that we are looking at this is storage batteries. So we are working with the University of Texas on the next generation design of battery storage. We have a few that are in pilot stages in our data centers across the United States. Right now, it's very short-term duration of the batteries, but we're also thinking long-term here, and how not just for our data centers, but for the local grid, how can we put online these grid interactive batteries that store energy for hours and not minutes. And so we're looking to figure that out as well. And then we're not just looking at our assets, but we're also looking at how our technology can help our customers, who are utilities, can help our customers that are transportation companies, can help our customers that are buildings. And there has been massive advances in cloud technology, in machine learning, in the ability to process all of the data that was talked about, all of those sensors, all of those different nodes, and to do that in real time. So for a grid, you can understand what's happening on the supply side, what's happening on the demand side, and match that, so that you can understand if there is a weakness in the system and actually do some preemptive diagnostics to figure out where is your weakness in order to repair it, so that you can really have that full view with the real time to be able to better manage the load. So we're doing this with smart grids, we're doing the smart buildings, connected operations, smart factories, and the industrial sector. And this is really laying software on top of the hardware so that they can interact with each other to really enhance the resilience. One exciting pilot that we have underway is with one of the largest utilities in Norway. And what they were concerned about is they were having more renewables come on the line. A third of the cars in Norway are electric vehicles already. How do you integrate that into the grid? They were looking at the need for some significant new substations, and they wanted to look and see if software could help them address that need. And what it ended up doing is it was able for them to address peak demand in real time, so that they didn't need some of those new substations. They were able to avoid some of the maintenance by doing some preemptive analytics, and also be able to more easily integrate renewables, demand response, and EVs into their system. And so there are a lot of really great potential that we see in this space, and in the ability to really enhance the reliability of the system, the resilience of the system, the flexibility of the system, and enable more of this clean energy to come online.
Okay, with that, all set? Yep. Oh, excellent. All right, thank you, Michelle. So right now I think I'll have a few questions for the panelists related to this, and actually if everyone wants to go back to their seats, can we raise the projector, please? So I want to go back, Michael, to what you defined, what we're really asking from the power grid, because I think it's interesting because safe, reliable, affordable, that's what FERC's mandate in many ways, and also the RTOs, that's what they're meant to do. It's safe, reliable, and affordable energy. And really, they've done a good job at that. What we're doing now, I think, are asking more folks to have the secure and resilient attributes. And so with that, my question to everyone comes from very diverse backgrounds. What's missing from the policy or market design perspective in order to, kind of add on the secure and resilient component to what we're really expecting from the electric industry? So with that, I don't know who wants to start on that, but really we had a lot of discussion on policy in the first panel, but what's sort of missing from that discussion, or what, needs to be highlighted more?
I think I can sort of get that kicked off. I think a big piece of this that's missing is that the current sort of structure of the markets and the incentive structures haven't really kept up with what technology can do. Some of these advances in machine learning and software and even some of the hardware. Today's devices, and I'm an energy storage guy, so I'll talk about batteries. So like battery storage in particular is capable of doing so many different distinct jobs that it's sort of mind-blowing. I think we can identify 24 different distinct useful applications for energy storage, for an energy storage device that could help the grid stay safe, affordable, reliable, secure, and resilient.
Yeah.
But they're not doing these things by and large today. And the reason is that the storage owner can't get paid for them. So this is all sort of abstract. So let's think of something very concrete here. I think one big topic is sort of how do we integrate more renewable energy, right? Naysayers will complain that it's intermittent and it's sort of unreliable. And so you could imagine having this sort of renewable firming as a service, right? You could meter a solar farm, you could meter a battery system, and when one went down, the other one could go down with it, so that the net result of all that would be sort of firm power, net of everything. Completely capable, we could roll out that service tomorrow, but there's just no reason to, and the reason is that I would be exercising my battery for sort of no gain. So from a policy standpoint, there needs to be a way to match all the good stuff that we can do and with all of the sort of needs out there, so that and essentially make a market for it.
Michelle? Yeah.
I'll just follow on that. A lot of the talk this morning was focused on the grid resilience NOPR. There is a lot of also other activity that's happening at FERC that pertains to this space. About 3 weeks ago, FERC passed this really watershed rule on storage, and saying that classifying storage as its own electricity participant, and tasking the RTOs and the ISOs to develop these types of tariffs, these types of contractual agreement structures in which they can participate. There is a separate conversation, or related, that was split out on the other body of behind the meter assets, if it's energy efficiency,
Distributed energy resources,
that will have a technical conference in a few weeks. And this is really related.
April 10th and 11th.
April 10th. Hopefully everyone will participate.
Yeah.
But this is really related because it's the technology component of what is possible.
Yeah.
And helps further this resilience debate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just as a quick side, I cannot emphasize enough for the people in this room that are really interested in this, getting involved at the FERC and the RTO ISO level. That is really where a lot of the rubber hits the road. Michelle correctly pointed out, it's FERC Order 841. If anyone has questions, we talk about it afterwards. I actually worked on PGM's response when I was still in house there. So I know quite a, and unfortunately don't have to deal with the aftermath of what FERC tasked PGM to do. God bless everyone at PGM working on that. But essentially all the rules for storage participation in RTO markets, even though there are a lot of, marching orders given to the RTOs, a lot of the stakeholder processes are where a lot of the technical requirements are come. So the things that Will's talking about, how do you value storage, different attributes that can be priced in the markets, all that's going to get worked out within at FERC and at the RTO level over the next couple of months. And so I definitely encourage everybody to get involved with that to the extent they can, and at the least be aware of it, because it does all relate. So with that, and excellent point, Michelle. Michael or Eric, anything to add just on that first question, and I can get into something else afterwards?
I think there's a clear recognition of the potential of energy storage to be an extreme game changer, especially from resiliency. We have so much investment going into renewable power that's intermittent and that's acknowledged and understood, but the investment is largely driven by non-resiliency incentives for cleaner power and then for more affordable power. But the resiliency feature that could be unlocked by combining that with storage is truly amazing. Look at from the Army, we did a little tabletop exercise looking at one installation, one of our bases that had 114 backup diesel generators located around the base. And this is typical, and the base has a spread of about 14 miles. Most of the activity is concentrated in a 6 to 8 mile radius area. And as we evaluated that, what would it take to run those generators long term. The Army imposed upon itself a 14-day requirement. We need to have 14 days of assured power and water. We set that standard for ourselves. So we run our tabletop exercise, and we find that sure enough, we've got 3 days worth of fuel tagged onto each of these backup diesel gensets. And so after 3 days, you're out of fuel. And there's a bulk storage facility on the Army base, but then you've got to get that fuel from that bulk storage facility to 114 different points. And this is all unfolding presumably in the middle of a crisis of some sort. And so you find yourself maximally occupied trying to run around to 114 diesel gensets and refuel them, which range from 50-gallon tanks to 3,000-gallon tanks, depending on what the need of the generator was. And you find it's really just an unworkable proposition.
Yep.
So what we find is the constraint is not generation, constraint is resupply of the fuel needed to feed that generation. And as was sort of spoken to and evidenced as we were talking about things like if the highway's jammed with cars or some weather-related phenomenon has jammed up the highways, the fuel trucks can't get to the gas stations to refill the gas tank so you can fill your car so you can get the hell, and everything. It all starts to bog down on the resupply issue, not just the generation, but now you've got this secondary issue going on. Storage coupled with renewables attacks that resupply thing really handily. It's a really neat feature. Your resupply, as long as you have enough storage to carry you through, if you will, the darkness or the non-wind, and you can couple that together, knowing that storage is incredibly expensive right now, it presents such great promise. I think it really needs to be recognized for its resiliency value. It needs to be incentivized somehow in the system.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Eric?
I think what we see is, particularly as you're looking at the behind the meter solutions, the challenge that we always have, and it's not directly related to resiliency, but it kind of ties in, is the just diversity of the requirements at a utility level, right? Interconnecting in a backup power system or interconnecting in a natural gas system or a fuel cell system or whatever it may be, that interconnection arrangement with a utility, which is controlled by the utility, creates such diversity in the requirements that it's not easy to transact. So not everyone has resources like a Microsoft or the U.S. Army to kind of help guide through that process. And so what ends up happening is they just kind of shut down because it's so complex. And so even though they need that resiliency at a local level, they can't figure out how to make it happen because there is no true guidelines around, or national guidelines around how do you interconnect at the utility grid level.
Interesting. Thank you. So you think that even something as simple as having more uniform standards across utility interconnection processes would be a tremendous, it would be a real value add?
Speaking as a behind-the-meter solutions provider, yes. Yeah. Speaking as Southern Company, I'm sure they would probably have a different opinion on that. Right? So I'm not speaking for them today.
Understood. No, thank you. I'm going to ask one question and then turn it over to the audience. And something we are indirectly were talking about, but it's something also that the first panel didn't talk about it as much. But everyone's kind of been beating around the bush, so I'm going to see it. I'm just going to say it. And it's the climate attributes of resilience. And that may get a dirty or clean tech related attributes of resilience. And, Michael from the U.S. Army, Michelle from Microsoft, both have said very clearly, look at, the renewable aspect as something that added to resilience. Michelle and I were talking before, Moody's, for example, a few weeks ago is starting to downgrade and upgrade municipal bonds based on, the city's, ability to withstand climate change. Investors are looking at it from a risk perspective. It is a huge deal. And I think personally, if we come up with a host of rules in the next few months and years at FERC and elsewhere that doesn't address that, if we just start providing, price signals for, that's advantageous to, let's say, dirty diesel generators or 114 diesel generators, but don't value, let's say, a solar plus storage resource that can do the same thing as a diesel generator, but has all these other attributes. We may be saying ourselves for more climate-related issues, more weather-related issues, and not valuing the climate-related aspect of resilience. So with that, that wasn't a question. That was me just kind of going off the top of my head. With that, though, I wanted to see if you guys had any sort of insights or ideas of best practices of how to value what I'll call the clean/climate-related part of resilience into this so that you can have some sort of investment signal. And I don't know if you guys, is it an incentive? Is it a mandate? Is it some sort of a market price signal that the RTOs develop? Wanted to see if you guys had any sort of initial thoughts on that.
So the Army, our practices, I can't say in Washington. You guys know policy is you can't just say throw policy out there. You got to be more specific sometimes. Statute, regulation, requirements. So our practices are to facilitate the projects that I mentioned in my office at or below grid pricing. That is, we're not going to pay a lot for this muffler, right? We're not going to. That's an old reference. We're seeking not to incentivize the market by simply saying I'll pay more for it, because I don't think that's an acceptable way to begin. I think improving everything you can to improve liquidity in this market, like other actions are done to improve liquidity in financial markets, is to our benefit. If we can get the ability to transact across these boundaries that are maybe constrained by regulation, that's probably to our advantage. And with that, then more economic value can be found, more technological advancements can be inserted, more valuations of things like the clean aspect can be found. But you don't want to start by picking winners and losers, because that serves in the other direction. It's a constraining factor. For example, Rick Murphy back here from the Gas Association, we're talking with them. There's nothing wrong with natural gas. In fact, it's a huge opportunity that needs to be more fully realized. And from a resiliency play, if I were a community looking to improve my resilience, I'd be looking to ask the gas producers, for example, what are you looking for? Are you looking for new pathways for pipelines? I know that's a touchy subject right now, but it's a great resiliency aspect to that. However, your question was about renewables. I think renewables stand on their own
generally. Yeah. So I mean.
Yeah, I think that they provide terrific benefit, but we have to focus on what are the attributes we're after. We're not willing to pay more for something that is not required necessarily. We are most interested in more resilient power and secure power at a price that is affordable.
Thank you. Michelle?
So a few thoughts. Just adding on your comments, I just want to highlight that at the World Economic Forum 2 months ago, that they released their annual list of risks that businesses face, and it's a survey of international businesses, and they had said that the biggest risk is extreme weather events and climate-related events. And I think what you're beginning to see, or seeing more and more by companies, is that these are really supply chain issues. If for however you calculate the direct impact of climate change, that you're seeing a lot of environmental stress happen throughout the supply chain, and companies more and more are realizing it's more expensive to mitigate during the crisis than it is to plan ahead, especially if you're building infrastructure that's going to last 10, 20, 30 years. And so they're beginning in boardrooms to figure out what that internal pricing is, and how do you make that calculation, even if the policy isn't there.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. Will or Eric, anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think your question kind of points to the tale as old as time problem here. So I would just say that if there's a result that you want, then people should be prepared to pay some money for it, because there's a lot of creative folks out there like kind of chasing a dollar, right? And the economist in me would kind of point to that as a little bit of a loaded question, because right now, if I get to run a diesel genset and throw all that stuff out, all that nasty stuff out the exhaust, like I'm sort of socializing that cost on all of you guys, right? So how do we sort of bring in that externality, as they say? That might go. I don't have a good answer to that. I know that there's Virginia is pushing to join like the sort of the Reggie states. You and I could have a long debate over whether they're doing it in a good way or not, in a fair way or not. But I think that's the intent of it, right? Is to sort of level that playing field, if you will, because one of them has an exhaust pipe and one of them doesn't. So it's tough to compare apples to apples, and therefore dollars to dollars in that case.
Excellent. Good point. Thank you, everyone.
Can I add on that? So there are other value propositions that may not be realized that are out there for different customers. For the Army, for example, what I like about renewables in our context is typically very few moving parts, much lower maintenance requirements, much easier to build and get up and running in short order, other than the planning and permitting and so on. But those attributes are something that we also value. In addition to the resupply perspective that I mentioned earlier, it's quiet. This provides a specific advantage to military activities.
Yeah.
What my office does not do, but what would be intriguing perhaps to some, is how we're deploying what we call a tactical set of technologies that is in the battle space. When you go over there to fight, we're employing renewables. We don't really call them renewables so much. We call it basically a self-sustaining operation. It's quiet. You don't have to truck in a whole bunch of fuel. You don't have to have guys standing by making sure it's running all the time. It runs itself. Few moving parts, low touch. So there's these other attributes as well to renewables that interest us.
Yeah. And I just quick, I remember this is years ago, but someone was talking about during the war in Afghanistan at the time. Something like 1 out of 4 casualties were based on some number like that were based on just fuel convoys, and that's actually where a lot of the Army's interest began to peak during the early 2000s, and just because they're easy target, they were combustible, obviously. They're excellent, but thank you for your insight on that. With that, we have time for a few questions. Let's go in the back. Yep, and if everyone can just say who they're with.
Sure. Good morning, Edward Yim. I'm an energy policy advisor for the DC government. And Stephen, I really wanted to thank you for this last question on the clean attribute. Because whenever you go to a bunch of these things, and you always hear about the added attributes of security and resiliency, but people generally drop the clean. That's been really driving the grid transformation in some way. So along that line, I just wanted to ask the question for Michael. Thank you for your presentation, and Michelle, thank you as well. In thinking about your backup power, as you have, and both of you talked about the role that natural gas can play as part of like a microgrid or on-site generation. But I also wanted to see, Michelle, from your point of view in terms of sustainability, and Michael from your point of view on like fuel diversity, whether you might consider other sources for backup generation, like for example biogas directed biogas, CHP, or fuel cells as well. From the sustainability point of view, that has a nice closed loop that ties in local waste that gives you, renewable fuel. It gives you another source of, fuel source, Michael, that you can just rely on at the local site. So I just want to get your thoughts on that. I know that has some success in California with that kind of technological solution.
So actually, on our Wyoming site, we also had a pilot on biogas as well, and I had said this was 250 megawatts, and so that's a significant amount of backup that is needed, to try and back up that wind. So in terms of when you look at the scale and the economics and the efficiency, I think right now we were going live and needed to go with the fuel that would hit all of those marks, and it was done in comparison to the utility wanted to build a cold peaker. In terms of fuel cells, obviously we're doing a lot of investing and R&D in that as well, and we're trying to make sure that they are going to, that they can take any fuel. So right now the fuel that's available in downtown Seattle is natural gas. We're hoping that it will be able to operate on hydrogen whenever that becomes available as then. So I think we are, in our R&D efforts, we are very much making sure that, over time, that we can bring down, really bring down the carbon and make this as low carbon as possible. But we also want to be operational and use the best fuel that's available today.
Thank you.
So to look broadly at the Defense Department, which I really can't speak broadly, but to look at it, I'm aware that we have the gamut. We have explored and tested and implemented probably just about anything you could think of, to include nuclear, to include radiothermal generators, but also wind, solar, hydro, biofuel, biomass, landfill gas, CHP, micro CHP, hydrogen, fuel cell. I can point to all those examples currently up and operational. So my office looks at large scale projects, and we're looking for typically sort of larger campus like solutions and not building by building solutions for entities that manage their affairs a building at a time, it makes more sense to look at these eaches kinds of solutions. When we have a whole campus, typically that's a base, it's a campus, it's got hospital, it's got schools, it's got daycare, it's got airfield, it's got a grocery store, it's got a thing, everything a small town would have and more. We have to look at a campus-like setting. So I think that when you go to scale, some of these don't pencil out. It's too small to make a huge difference. But we have explored pretty much everything. We have a history that's hundreds of years old, and in many cases we were the only thing there at the time, and so we established ourselves with an independence that carried through. If it's on a river, we've looked at hydro. If we have access to the water rights, we've looked at hydro. If there's wind nearby, we've looked at wind. If there's a large solar potential, we've looked at solar, et cetera, et cetera. Geothermal. We have some massive geothermal. Navy in particular has one massive geothermal plant. So I'd say yes, we've looked at it all. We also have the additional complication that the people that work at these bases rotate. And so you don't want to train a person up to understand how hydro works and then throw him out in the middle of a geothermal plant. The Army is less concerned about that, but the Air Force, for example, they actually train operators, blue suit, as they call it, uniform-wearing people, to maintain some of these systems because they expect to go forward into the battle space and also maintain similar systems. So they like to make sure that people know what they're doing, so that hopping around from place to place and getting sort of multitask, which means you're a master of nothing, it becomes a complicating factor too. So we try to keep things simple, and that's probably one reason why diesel gensets have persevered. They're pretty dead simple.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're unfortunately out of time for this panel, and I want to definitely keep enough time for everyone else to network afterwards. So we have a half hour where we can stay within the room and keep the discussion going. So I don't want to by any means say, not to keep talking about this, but want to turn over to Dave McCarthy. First of all, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate the insight. And Nelson Mullins really thanks everyone for coming here and participating. I think we're going to have to do this again at some point. It's been a good thing. But with that, I want to hand up to Dave McCarthy, Potential Energy DC, for closing remarks, and then we'll talk afterwards and everything else. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So there is one more agenda item, and it's networking. One of my favorite pieces of this, because when I come to an event like this, I always like to take one to do for myself, which is to find one person that I've met at an event like this and do something with them going forward. Some level of business, some level of communication. So hopefully you all take that sort of challenge for yourself as well. For me, my name is Dave McCarthy. I'm the Executive Director of Potential Energy DC. As far as I know, we are still the only incubator community fully devoted to energy and sustainability startups here in DC. So there are 4 companies over here that will be demoing their products and solutions. I'll say that they're scrappy startups, but we're actually at a point now within Potential Energy DC that we're not really that scrappy and startup-y anymore. Will is one of our members. Matt Carlson is one of our members. Matt, in the back. Sam Wilson right here will be manning the DataQuip booth, and Rashek Rahman over there. These are actually companies that have started pre-revenue, are now growing, are now taking on employees, and are taking on investment along the way. So I'd really strongly encourage, if you haven't met one of the panelists yet, to meet one of these companies and make them your follow-up moving forward. And with that, you always hate to be the last speaker before lunch, but it's a little bit early for lunch. So there's still tons of food, tons of coffee. Please hang out. Meet our wonderful companies on your way up. Maybe it's brunch time, more like that. All right. And then my last thank you before we break for networking and engaging with one another is I want to say thank you to Charles Hernick, again, from Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. Fantastic. The notion that there is such a thing of right of center and still interested in energy and environmental stuff, I love it. All right. Steve Sparber, is Dave Quam in the room as well? They were sort of the other 2 of the group that really put this whole event together. And when I look at something like this, which has Cress and Nelson's Mullen and Potential Energy DC all next to each other, it just brings a real smile to my face. Love working with you guys, and hopefully we will do this again soon. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy brunch and enjoy the startups, and take that one to do. Meet somebody that you're going to do some business with. Thank you very much.